Okay, good morning, everyone. So before today's class, let me just share you with the news. In the morning, the Nobel Prize committee, they just announced this year's Nobel Prize winner. Both of them coming from Stanford. But there's an interesting fact. One of the Nobel Prize laureate, he was born in Nebraska. It's a small town near Omaha. It's called Geneva. So his name is Wilson. He's a professor in Stanford. Right? So I find out this is an interesting fact. I believe he probably is the first, probably for sure. So he's the first Nebraskan ever win a Nobel Prize. Right. Okay. So now let's back to our content, our economics. Right. So where we are. So this slide hopefully summarize what we have discussed last week regarding to labor market. So in this chapter, we are trying to understand how to measuring the economic activity in labor market, right? So basically, so basically, we are interested into how to understand the health of the labor market. Okay, and then so far, so we focus on unemployment rate, but of course we look at other things, right? But in order to measure unemployment rate, how we do. So let me just draw a circle to explain so how we define unemployment rate. So this circle is going to represent adult population. Make sure you understand what does adult population means or how we define adult population. Okay, so given adult population, we divide this into two groups. So this is not in labor force. LF stands for labor force. And then so the rest is in labor force. For people in labor force, we divide into people are employed versus people unemployed. Right, so that's how we characterize the adult population. Okay, given this characterization, and then so we define the unemployment rate as U divided by LF, but then so LF equal to U plus E. Okay, here, so U is unemployed, E is employed, right? So, and to be precise, how we define a person as unemployed. This is a person don't have a job, actively looking for a job during the past 4 weeks, right? So that's how we define unemployment rate. And then so we also look at labor force participation rate, that's LF divided by adult population. All right, just keep in mind, so the denominator is the adult population. Right, so these are two things we have to look at, right? Okay, so and then so we explain unemployment rate is a good indicator for the health of the labor market, but it's not perfect. It is not perfect in the sense unemployment rate doesn't tell you first discouraged worker. Right? Who are discouraged worker? Who hasn't been looking for a job during past 4 weeks? So who has been looking for, but then so feel exhausted or feel hopeless? Okay, and then think about in this chart. So essentially, someone who decide leave labor force. And secondly, unemployment rate doesn't tell us the story of those marginally attached workers who don't have a job, who has tried during the past year, but not recently. Okay? And then lastly, unemployment rate doesn't tell us those involuntarily part-time workers who want to have a full-time job if it is possible. But unfortunately, they could not find or it's not available. Okay, so that's the limitation of unemployment rate. So that's why we look at labor force participation rate. This labor force participation rate can tell us a story about discouraged worker. And besides that, we also look at quality of job in terms of how many work or how many jobs are full-time. And then we also look at average wage, right? Because the wage tells us the quality of jobs, right? So that's why we look at that, right? And we have seen these practice questions, right? So that just help you to understand. And this one is also quite interesting. So this practice question just help us understand how we characterize a person in the economy, right? So number one, so this must be adult population. Number two, so this must either have a job or is looking for a job. So that is considered as labor force, otherwise not in labor force, right? Okay. So we will do this. Now, right, so here just summarize what I just reviewed. Right, so besides unemployment rate, besides here, so we look at labor force participation. We look at number of full-time job and then look at average wage. Okay, so we look at these three additional measures. Why we do that? It just complements what is missing from looking at unemployment rate itself. Right. Okay. So we also have looking at these, right? So in terms of unemployment rate, so there is quite significant divergence in terms of age, in terms of rates. Okay. Okay, so now we can look at unemployment and its correlation with economic growth. Okay. So this is after 1978. So we have a total of 5 episodes of recession. But now if we extend the data to 2020, and then so we are going to see, so basically we can just extrapolate or to complete this picture. Okay, this is how the actual data looks like. Right? And then so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 recessions since 1978. All right. So now you're going to see the unemployment rate will be high during recession. All right. Okay, so we are going to explain to you later. So why unemployment rate is typically high during recession. But for now, so just pay attention. This is just empirical facts, or this is what the data tells us. Okay. And in terms of business cycle, or in terms of recession, so we have special terms called jobless recovery. So this is a period in which the real GDP growth is positive, but unemployment rate is still rising. So actually, so we have this term recently in 2008, 2009, Great Recession. So that point of time, so we did observe a positive real GDP growth rate, but the unemployment rate was rising at the same time. Okay? So this is called jobless recovery. So essentially, so the economy is recovering, but we don't observe a recovery in labor market. So that's how it goes. Okay. So we can look at the unemployment change and growth, okay, for a longer period of time, right? And then so basically we find an inverse correlation. Okay, so basically you just feed the data with either a straight line or a curve. Right, so this line is going to tell the relationship between average growth rate. Okay, sorry. It's going to tell us the real GDP growth rate for each year versus changes on unemployment rate on that particular year. So each dot, so for example, so this dot, is represent 2010 or represent a particular year after 1948. Again, so this is for US economy. Right? And from this graph, you can see there's a significant negative correlation between real GDP growth and change in unemployment rate. And that just means if GDP slow down, or if we have negative growth rate, and then the unemployment rate will increase. On the other hand, if GDP growth rate is positive, the unemployment rate will decline. Okay. Now, here this slide highlight the importance of looking at unemployment rate for some particular age group. Okay. So we have data from 2007 to 2011. Right? And the 2009, that's in the peak of the recession, or the deep of the recession, I probably should say. Okay. So we look at two groups. One is for anyone over 25. The other one is recent college graduate students. Like most of you will become part of them in 2 or 3 years. Right? So if we look at these two groups, you're going to see very stark difference. Right? For the overall population, and particularly for over 25, yes, we observe an increase in unemployment rate, and then it's a gradual decline. Right? So the decline speed is very slow. So that's partially reflects the jobless recovery I just mentioned earlier. Okay? But if we look at recent college graduates, the scenes becomes very, very bad. Right? Because it's 7.7 versus 2. In the worst day of the recession, so the recent college graduate, so they're experiencing almost 16% of unemployment rate, compared with 4.6%. Yes, both preserve this hump shape increase and then gradually decrease. But recent college graduates, they suffered way more compared to the general population. And this is very important in the sense, so this is going to have long-term damage to the future labor force, right? Because if recent college graduate students, so when they just start to launch their career, and then they have a hard time to find a job, okay? So that's going to delay the human capital accumulation. Okay? And most likely, they probably will start a job that fits their ability or fits their skill less well. So that's going to have long-term impact on their future career. Right? So that's why we look at unemployment rate through different dimensions. Okay. Now we are ready to look at natural rate of unemployment rate. Okay. Just keep in mind, so in the earlier slides, so we look at the unemployment rate for the US economy after World War II. And I highlight two facts. Number one, the unemployment rate never below 2%, and most of the time it's greater than 4%. That's for the US unemployment rate after World War II. And then number two, the unemployment rate average is probably between 4 and 6% average. Right? Okay, and then so here, so this slide just summarize these facts. Over the past 50 years, the national unemployment rate has never dropped below 2.9%. Okay? And these just have a strong indicator there's some unemployment rate or some unemployment. It's natural to the economy. It's something we probably have to live with it. Okay? But then so we need to find out what are they and why there are certain type of unemployment. It's natural. And we must live with it. To answer that questions, we need to characterize unemployment by is natural. Okay? And then so we find out there are three types of unemployment. We call them frictional, structural, and cyclical. Okay? So in order to understand the difference between these three types of unemployment, so I'm going to draw a picture to show you how the labor market works, okay? And how a typical individual move around in the labor force or in the labor market, so that we understand those three types of unemployment. Right. Okay, so where we start? So you can think about, so let me just first draw the circle as we have seen many times. Right. So this again, this is adults population. Okay? And then so of adults population, we have three categories. This is employed. This is unemployed. This is not in labor force. Okay? So in any point of time, so we can characterize the adults population, any adult population, into one of those three categories. So this is our starting point. Now you can imagine, so these are like three islands. Okay, so there are three islands you can live on. And then, so at any point of time, so people are just moving around in these three islands. Okay, so that's the way we understand. So now let's just look at this flow chart. So we have three possibility or three islands you can be. Either you are employed or you are unemployed. Or alternatively, so you may decide not in labor force. There are three possibilities or three islands you can live in the actual economy. All right. So now let's see. So how people is going to move around in a particular time of a year, or during their career. All right. So start with, let's say, employed. Okay. So if currently I have a job, either as a part-time or full-time, I'm considered as employed. Right. And then at any point of time, two things can happen. One, I may move from employed to unemployed. Or so I was employed, but then so I becomes not in labor force. So those are two possibilities. But now we need to understand what are those two possibilities. Right? So employed goes unemployed. So this just reflects, for example, layoff, furlough, right? So during the current pandemic, lots of people lost their job, either temporarily or permanently. It's because the business is ordered to close. Okay, so this is how we move from employee to unemployed. Okay, so basically you lay off. Right. All right. So, but there are also a small fraction of people move from employee to unemployed. Doesn't because they get laid off. Right? And they may be just moving between jobs. Right? So you may find a new job, and then it's taking you time to relocate from job A to job B. Okay, so you move from employee to unemployed, partly because you lay off. Let's just put it here. So some just lay off or lost job, or some was in transition to new jobs. Right, so there are two possibilities. Now let's look at employee to not in labor force. Okay, so the biggest category you can think about is retirement. Right? So you leave from the labor force. But certainly, so there are employees, so they decide to leave the labor force, not because of their retirement. Maybe they have other things to do. Think about they need to take care of their family. Right? Or maybe someone decide, okay, so I need to go to school again so that I have a better future career. Okay? So those are two possible group of people who move from employed to not in labor force. Now, let's look at unemployed. So unemployed, they may move to employed, it's captured right here, or they may move to not in labor force. Like I just explained to you. Now let's see, so who are they? Okay. Unemployed to employed. That is essentially, to think about worker get record. Okay. It was laid off, but now they just record. Or for those worker who found a job, right? So the economy is recovering, right? And then they found a job. Right? Also, so here, just keep in mind, so there are people who move from employee to unemployed because of job transition, right? So we need to include them. There's a small fraction of people who was relocation. Now they're ready for their new job. Okay, so other possibility for unemployed is quit from the labor force, right? Like we just discussed at the beginning of today's class, you have discouraged worker. Okay, so you have discouraged worker. Okay, or you have people feel, okay, so I have other things to do, but essentially like discouraged, so they need to become like family, right? So they move around unemployed, and then they decide, okay, so I don't want to looking for a job anymore, so I find out something else to either take care of the family, or I just take some leisure time. Right. So this is unemployed. Now, lastly, we look at people who not in labor force. So they also have two options. So they may transit to employed, or they becomes unemployed. Okay. So not in labor force, they becomes employed. So this means they found a job. The biggest group in this flow of individuals are college graduates, right? Because college students, particularly full-time college students, they consider not in labor force. Once graduated from the college, and they found a job, and then so they're ready to be considered as employed, but they just move out of not in labor force to employed, right? Now, on the other hand, so you have people not in labor force, and then they return to labor force. But first, they become unemployed. Who are they? But then, so we need to think about who has decided to quit from labor force. So this probably is someone who has been busy with family, right? Or those who has been discouraged due to the recession. Now they feel the economy is booming. There is some chance, so I'm going to return. Also, maybe you can think about they are retired. Okay? And then they find, so I don't have enough saved for my retirement. So I need to get some supplemental income. So they move out of the situation of not in labor force. They start to looking for job again. Right? So this is how individuals or people is going to move around in any point of time. Right? So between employed, unemployed, and not in labor force. Right? Throughout this discussion, so you're going to see, so the unemployment caused by different reasons. Okay? And then, so this is going to be caused by different reason refers to what we just mentioned. Now let's start with the first type of unemployment. Okay? It's called frictional unemployment. Okay? And this type of unemployment is caused by the time workers must spend in job search. Okay? So why you want to spend time to looking for a job and at a cost to be unemployed? It's because you want to find a better job, right? And then so here you face a trade-off. What is the trade-off? So the longer time or pickier it becomes, okay? And then so eventually you're going to get better job, high paid, or better suit with your skill, or you feel more satisfied. So that's the cost, that's the benefit. But what's the cost if you search for longer time or becomes quite picky for the job? So the cost is you have to stay in unemployed for longer time. So that's a trade-off. Right? So this trade-off certainly exists. And the existence of this trade-off is going to lead to this particular type of unemployment, which is frictional. Because there are people or there are workers willing to spend extra time staying unemployed so that they can find better job or a job is going to suit their skill better. It is frictional. And what causes this frictional unemployment? Fundamentally, this is caused by scarcity of information. Okay? And so how we understand the scarcity of information? Okay, so in this picture, so we have three individuals, right? And for these three individuals, or in general, for everyone, it's going to take you for a while to really understand what are you good at, what is your passion, right? And then, so during these times, so you may think, you may search, and eventually you match with the job you like. Other way to think about this scarcity of information, maybe to think about dating market, right? So you know certainly somewhere in the world you can find out your significant others, but because of the scarcity of information in terms of what type of person you really like, or where is the person you really like, you don't know where she is or where he is, right? It just takes you time to sort out everything. The same in the labor market. Okay, so you know there's a job, you know there's a dream job for you, but it just takes time. And then why it takes time? Because there's scarcity of information. If somehow you have all the information in terms of all the jobs, and you can process all the information instantaneously, and then so you can immediately send your job application to the green jobs. And also if the employers knows everything about you, about everybody, and then they immediately make the decision to hire the ideal candidate. But in reality, it's not the case. Right? So you don't have all the information. The employer also doesn't have all the information. Right? So that just costs time for us to sort into the right job, or cost time for the employer to feed the job with the ideal candidate. Okay? So then it's going to create frictional unemployment, or this create unemployment, and we call this frictional unemployment. Okay. All right, so if we look at the data, so we can spot the frictional unemployment, right? And then typically the shorter duration of unemployment, and it means more likely to be frictional. Because that's just the nature of frictional, right? It's because those people can find a job, it just takes time, right? And then so in this case, you can see there are 36% of people who are unemployed for less than 5 weeks. It just, for them, for the 36% of those unemployed, it should take them some time to sort out. But typically it's sort of very quickly. Okay, so those are frictional. Okay. As usual, so I will take a few minutes break, and then so we continue our discussion.